remind people what the event's about, what we're going to do. And really pleased to have our guest, Evan Lutz. I'm going to introduce Evan in a few minutes. And if you haven't been before, welcome. This is a community event that we try and do on a regular basis. We've got a few others scheduled for the semester. We had one already a couple of weeks ago. And we are, and it's a way of sort of bringing our community together and also learn something at the same time. And so, if you're in the audience and you haven't been here before and you don't recognize some of the people in the boxes, these are, it's other fellow students, if you're a student, faculty, staff, and we have some guests from our business partners, business community, I recognize. And so really, really welcome you. And the format we have is very simple. I'm going to have a discussion with our guests for about 15, 20 minutes. And then I'm going to break everybody into small groups. And there'll be really small groups. I'm going to do it completely randomly. I know Zoom has got a better way of assigning people nowadays, but I think the random thing works. So faculty end up with students, end up with our business partners together. We never know what the mix is going to be, and we kind of like it that way because students, you got kind of equal standing with everybody here. Faculty, you get equal standing with the staff, students as well. So it's a community. We're very democratic. Purpose of the subgroups, as well as being able to see and talk to people for 15 to 20 minutes, is to come back with some questions for the guests. And then the last 15, 20 minutes, I'm going to recollate them. I get some help from my colleagues. I'm going to collate the questions, and we have a kind of usually quite a vibrant discussion. Of course, if you got questions before the break, when I'm having the discussion, feel free to put them in the chat. I'll probably come back to the question early in the discussion session if you have something that's an early question. So that's the way we work it. So I'm going to start a discussion. I'm going to introduce you to Evan Lutz, who is the founder, CEO of Hungry Harvest. I'm going to have Evan describe Hungry Harvest, and this is our starting point. But Evan is from Baltimore. He founded Hungry Harvest, I believe, when he was a student. And we're going to discuss that as well, because I know some of you on this call are actually student entrepreneurs, and you really like that, like learning from other student entrepreneurs. What Evan's bio tells us, he's passionate about food justice, entrepreneurship, and the Baltimore Ravens. And so these are three good topics we like to talk about here. But we're going to focus on the first two today, hopefully. And but Evan's a frequent guest on NPR, Washington Post, Baltimore news stations. He's been recognized in Forbes 30 under 30 in social entrepreneurship category, and Baltimore's 40 under 40, Montgomery County's Emerging Business of the Year award, and and which has been won by quite extraordinary other companies, including Comcast. And he's also featured, and you can actually look this up and see it on YouTube, I think, on ABC's Shark Tank, where he made a deal with Robert Herjavec. So that's Evan. So welcome, Evan, and I really appreciate you being here. And let me ask you, the first question. So everybody's on an equal footing here. Just tell us a little bit about, just to explain what Hungry Harvest is, and but once you give us a heads up on that, because I think this is it's an interesting company in itself. I'm really interested in, what caused you to get into this business and find this in the first place. So Hungry Harvest, what is it for those that don't know it? Some people may know very well what it is, but what is it? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. First of all, Dean Murray. Second, pleasure to be talking to everybody today. I'm very passionate about Baltimore. I'm born and raised there. Just lived there and worked there for a very long time, and it's very close to my heart and my family's heart, and a lot of people that work for Hungry Harvest. So talking to students, faculty, people involved in the University of Baltimore is particularly exciting for me. Hungry Harvest is a produce and grocery delivery service, and we are on a mission to fight food waste and fight hunger and food insecurity. The way we do that is we source produce that otherwise would go to waste because of its size, its shape, its color. Maybe there are scars on the outside, or maybe it's perfectly fresh and looks beautiful, but otherwise would go to waste because of various reasons in the food system that we can get into. But all of it is perfectly fresh. We source straight from farmers, and it's even fresher produce that we sell than you'd find at a grocery store. And then we deliver it to our consumers. Anybody who signs up on our website, it's a subscription-based service. You can choose what you want in your harvest. You can choose, we have a variety of different produce that we offer every single week, usually about 50 different produce items, and usually around 100 different other grocery items, such as yogurts and bread and eggs and all the other things you'd likely find in a grocery store. And except everything that you'd find on our website is really there to fight waste and fight hunger. And if I didn't just tell you that all this, the produce that we're sourcing would have otherwise gone to waste, you probably have no idea. See, the way the food system works is the ugly carrots, the crooked carrots get sorted away from the straight carrots, even though they have no tangible difference in quality, nutrition, and taste. They just look different. And so we source the crooked ones and send them to our customers, and people are very happy with them. And then the other side of our mission is to fight food insecurity. So we've developed about 4 or 5 programs to help fight food insecurity. Hunger and food insecurity are very complicated problems, and there's no silver bullet solution. So we started just doing donations to organizations that helped serve those that were in desperate need. A lot of food banks and pantries and shelters don't have access to fresh produce, so we thought we were doing very good by donating. But then we looked in a little bit deeper and found out there's a lot of people that are food insecure that actually have income, that actually do have a job, part-time or full-time, and just either one can't afford the fresh produce items or fresh healthy groceries that they need to be not food insecure, or 2, they don't have time to go to the grocery store, right? And so we developed this program called Produce in a Snap, where we sell the same produce we sell to our customers, just at a low cost in areas of high food insecurity. That program's reached 25 different locations before COVID kind of shut it down. And we've transformed that into a couple other programs called Harvest RX, which is targeted mainly at hospitals and insurance companies and clinics where they're signing their patients up for Hungry Harvest deliveries. And we also have a program called the Alternative Food Box, where corporations and large nonprofits and food banks are actually buying boxes in bulk from Hungry Harvest to distribute to their clientele. So our overall mission is to fight food waste and hunger. We do that by sourcing really fresh produce and delivering it to our subscribers through an e-commerce website. We've been doing this for about 8 years. I started this, I don't know, Dean Murray, do you want me to get into the origin story now?
Or? Yeah. I would, okay. I'll come back to a couple of things if we get time later. But that's a great explanation. Yeah, because I'm really kind of interested. I mean, you're obviously passionate about food and food insecurity, and there's a couple of questions I want to ask you about that. But yeah, how did you get into this business? So
Absolutely. So I'm 29 years old. I started this business when I was 21. We've been in business for about 8 years. My entire life, I've been fascinated by social entrepreneurship. This idea that you can engineer a business so that the more profits, the more revenue you make, the more good you're doing, the more impact you're doing. I've been really obsessed with the idea of creating a better world than when I found it, than when I came here. There's a lot of ways to do that. You can volunteer. You can do that in regular jobs. There's a lot of passion projects. For me, my passion was always using entrepreneurship. I think business is a very powerful vehicle to use to better the planet. And so I first learned about food waste when I was a junior in college. I went to the University of Maryland. As 11 members of my family went to the University of Maryland, so it's been all over my family. For one of my classes senior year, we actually had to start a social enterprise, start a business. I started learning about food waste and how much food was going to waste when I heard a presentation from a farmer about how he leaves about 40% of everything he grows actually on his farm. I went out to go visit him and I saw these peppers that were beautiful, that were half red and half green. And he said no grocery stores wanted them. I saw these sugar snap peas that had little kind of notches on the outside, but they were perfectly good. They were nutritious, they were healthy, they were fresh, and nobody wanted them. The buyers didn't want them because they had notches on the outside that weren't perfect to the specifications. And I did more research and found out there's 20 billion pounds of produce that go to waste every single year in this country. 40% of everything we grow in the United States ultimately goes to waste. That 40%, we're using lands the size of New Mexico. About 18% of the land mass in the United States is dedicated for farming. And so if you do 40% of that, about 8 or 9%, 8 or 9% of the United States is used to grow food that goes to waste. That's the size of the state of New Mexico that we're using to grow food that goes to waste. It's incredibly resource inefficient. Think about the energy, the materials, the water that goes into growing all that food, and it does not have a home. And so I really wanted to change that. At the same time, back in 2014, 2013, when I was getting this started, there wasn't really a great brand around produce. There were some brands around groceries. Amazon has been around for a long time. Same with Peapod and some other grocery delivery services, but there wasn't really a strong brand around fresh, healthy groceries. And so I thought there was a really good message and good story to be told by bringing a great brand to tell this story. So that's where Hungry Harvest evolved. I started this college project of selling 5-pound bags of variety of fruits and vegetables to college students outside of our student union at the University of Maryland. I was hauling these bags of 50 pounds of onions and kale and potatoes up and down these steps. I was taking the produce from my car, going to this farmer's place down in St. Mary's County, driving all the way back to the University of Maryland, setting up shop, doing everything myself. The first week we had about 20 students that came up to our stands. The next week it was 30. And by the end of the semester, about 6 months later, we had 500 customers per week. So we're selling $2,500 worth of recovered produce per week on a $100,000 a year run rate. This is while I was in school selling recovered fruits and vegetables. I had no idea this was going to work out this well, right? It kind of just fell into my lap. Of course, I was passionate about this project, but I had no idea the kind of demand that was out there. We're really solving a need in the community for our customers and for the environment, right? It's a win for the farmers because this is produce that they're not otherwise selling, right? This is profit that they're not otherwise getting. So they're happy to work with us. Customers are happy to work with us because we're providing the same quality of produce for much cheaper. Plus we have the mission. And so it was really, there's multiple value propositions going on with our business. And that's where it really took off. The first couple of years, we were very difficult to get off the ground. I lived at home. I was very lucky that I was able to do that. Didn't pay myself a dime until we were able to. I was knocking on a lot of doors, trying to get this business off the ground. I didn't know anything about marketing or management or logistics or fresh produce or the food industry. All of this I was just really passionate about it. And I was determined to fight through adversity because I knew there was going to be issues and a lot of problems that I did not know how to solve. And in my opinion, all of life is a learning opportunity, right? You never stop learning. Not when you're out of school, not when you work at a job. So I took this as this is a learning project, right? This is a learning opportunity. And if worse comes to worse, if I fail, at least I will have learned a ton, right? I might not have made a lot of money in my first couple of years, but I will have learned a lot more than my peers, some of my friends who went out to all these cool cities to get these big jobs. And I was living in my parents' basement trying to start this produce company, if you can imagine that scene. And so eventually we got a call that Shark Tank was interested in us. I'm happy to tell a little bit more about the Shark Tank story. It was a very, very interesting process, I have to say. It was actually pretty invigorating and nerve-wracking being on the show, knowing that anything I said would be used against me on the scenes, and they could edit it however they wanted. And the Sharks are not known for being nice. But it turned out really well. We made a deal with Robert Herjavec for twice what we were asking for. I went in asking for 5% for 50,000 and came out with a deal for 10% for 100,000. And 6 months later, this was back in 2015, so the company was about a year old at that time. We aired in January of 2016. It was euphoria. We had the lieutenant governor come out. We had the county executive come out. We had all these. We have 100 people, to come out to this party, and we had Jamie Costello became a good friend over that time. He did the live broadcast at 11 p.m. from our office, which was really cool. It was just a really neat time, and from that point on, as you can imagine, the past 2 years I was living at home, not making any money, and just really struggling to get our boots on the ground. When we had a few hundred customers, not enough to pay the bills or not enough to pay anybody, we were just kind of relying on cash flow in order to run the business, bootstrapping it. We went from about 500 customers to about 3,000 overnight, and from there we were able to raise a little bit of money from some angel investors, hire a team from 4 people, which was at the time of Shark Tank, we were only a team of 4 full-time employees, went to a team of 12. And from there, we've just been growing ever since. So since then, or since founding the business, we've reduced about 40 million pounds, 35 to 40 million pounds of produce from going to waste. Today, we're an employee base of 100. I'm sitting here today in a warehouse in Landover, Maryland, that is 62,000 square feet. We have operations running basically 24/7. We have tens of thousands of customers serving 8 different markets. We have hundreds of different items. So this was just really a little farm stand outside of our student union, and it turned into a blossoming business that has been growing ever since the beginning. So I know you guys have a lot of questions. I see them coming up in the chat, so I'm happy to shut up and answer some questions.
Yeah, just before we go into the chat, it generated. I can see lots of questions, and I'm going to defer to the questions once we come back from and get to these questions when we come back from the break. But before we go into the break, because there's quite a lot of students here, and by the way, I recognize some students who have got similar dreams. That social entrepreneurship, doing better, is something they want to do. And I do notice some students here who are already launched businesses. So, you've been at it now 8 years and you started this as a student. What have you learned that you wish you knew when you were a student? That's
a lot of things. I'll start with the most important ones, or maybe because I could talk about this for days. So I'll try to keep this list as brief but as comprehensive as possible. The first one is you're the only one in your shoes. I say this because I got a lot of bad advice when I was first starting out. That you have to understand, when you're first starting out, the people that are giving you advice don't have to live with the decisions that you make, right? You're the one that has to live with the decisions you make. So people can give you advice on which way they would lean or what decision to make or what path to choose. Ultimately, they're not the ones that have to live with that choice, right? If you make a bad choice, they get to go on living their life, right? But you are stuck with that choice. And so I think that was really important to learn, that it was real. I had to pick who I took advice from really, really carefully. And also, even when I trusted my mentors and advisors really closely, I still had to take their advice with a little bit of grain of salt, because I had to understand that, like, I'm the only one that can make these decisions. I'm choosing to go into this business and entrepreneurship as my own person, right? And that was something that took me a very long time to understand. The second thing is company culture is paramount, right? Company culture starts when you're the only employee, right? Even when you even really have a team. When you have 2 people or 3 people, when you have a small team, company culture is really paramount. And one of those things, I can talk a lot about company culture and why it's so important, but one of the most important things early on that I wish somebody had told me is that failure is not only good in the beginning, but it's something that's so beneficial to your business it should be ingrained as part of your DNA of your culture. Failure should be embraced. It should be talked about. You shouldn't be ashamed of it. You should be transparent and vulnerable with your teammates. And that's how you gain trust, actually. There's a great TED Talk by Brene Brown, if anybody's familiar, on vulnerability-based trust. That is fantastic. And I highly recommend anybody listen to that. And I took those words to heart too. It talks about failure. And everybody experiences failure. You especially do that when you're early on. Believe it or not, you fail all the time when, even as your business grows. I fail all the time. The thing is, today when I fail or make mistakes, they are, at a magnitude bigger scale than when we first started, right? When I'm responsible for 100 employees. Back when I first started, I was responsible for 2 employees or 3 employees, right? So making mistakes today, there's a much bigger magnitude. But the key is being vulnerable and transparent and owning up to those failures and really ingraining that in your culture. I think is super important. And that takes time to learn how to do that skill. Another piece of culture that I would recommend is feedback. Learning to give and receive feedback is a skill that can be learned. Nobody's born with the ability to give feedback really well, or nobody's born with the ability to take feedback really well. It's a skill that needs to be learned. There's a great book called Crucial Conversations. If anybody's familiar with it, that is a really good guide to how to have some of those critical conversations. Being able to give feedback to teammates, that's how you build trust. And being able to take feedback from teammates, that is how you build trust as well. When you're early on, it's really critical that, yes, you are the ones that are, if you're the entrepreneur, you're the CEO, you are responsible for the success or failure of the business. But your teammates have to look at you as an equal, right? They have to look at you as trust, or else they won't come to you with problems. The worst problems you have are ones you don't know about, right? So you need to be able to build that trust with people. Just one more piece of advice. Again, I can keep on going on this topic for days, because again, I made a lot of mistakes when I was younger. I still do today, and learned a lot from it. One more piece of advice is, the pitch that I said today about what Hungry Harvest is, no joke, that's probably the 10,000th time I've said that in my entire life. Like I probably have said that over 10,000 times. Point being, talk to as many people as possible. Practice your pitch, refine it. It took me a very long time to actually get that pitch down, that 30-second pitch of how to describe our business, especially because back in 2013, 2014, nobody really knew what recovered food was, or upcycled food. These terms were not familiar. So I had to describe this over and over and over again, hundreds of times, thousands of times, in order to get that pitch down. And so my advice is meet as many people as possible. Don't be shy, get your name out there. And you never know where relationships are going to land. I lied. I said that was the last piece of advice. This is actually the last piece of advice I'll give. If you're thinking about raising money, speaking of relationships and not knowing where they're going to land, I think fundraising is a necessary evil in today's world of startups and the entrepreneurship fundraising. It's beneficial to help you scale faster. It's obviously you're giving up a part of your business. That's the con. But if you are interested in fundraising and raising money for your business, I'd highly recommend having those investor conversations now, because the investors that invested in Hungry Harvest, I met years before they actually wrote us a check. So it's really important to get your name out there, start meeting as many people as possible, and never, when people say no, to writing a check, which I've had over 500 investors say no to us over the years. That's not an exaggerated number. I can pull up the Excel sheet. Like 500 no's is a lot to handle, but it only takes 5 people. We have 5 investors that have said yes. So persistence is key, and get to those relationships early enough.
That's great. They're I'm sort of impressed that the advice you have and things you learned are not around the kind of hard things, hard skills, marketing, finance, whatever. But they're really, what I'm hearing, they're much more around, the people skills and how you work with your team and how you create culture. So I think that these are. I'm seeing a lot of really good questions in the chat. And so what I'm going to do now, I'm going to split this into small groups, but I'm going to make this I really want these small groups to be quite intense and interactive. So introduce yourselves. There's going to be 4 people in each group. Introduce yourselves. Come up with some questions that can be put in the chat. It can add to the chat. I'm going to start with some of the questions already in the chat when we come back. So we'll have about 10, just over 10 minutes in the chat, and it'll be, as I say, random. Evan, I'm going to put you in a group as well. So what I like the subgroups to do is to start putting your questions in the chat, and but I'm going to start off with a couple that were there earlier on, and this one is from Alicia. And it's really about how do you choose the sources of your produce? Do you use mostly small local producers, and what actions do you take to offset environmental impacts? There's quite a few questions here, but the sourcing one is I think is the main one. And are you using small local food distribution outlets like food hubs? Okay, so does that make sense?
Right. Yeah, it does. So we network with a lot of different farmers. We source from 2 primary places, farmers, which is about 60 to 70% of where we source from. And then we also source from wholesalers. We source from farmers. We meet them really through networking with other farmers. There's a ton of agricultural conferences that we go to. We meet farmers through state agencies, like state agricultural agencies that are very connected to the farmers community. We basically tell them our pitch, like any farmers that have product that gets canceled or product that is affected by the environment or would have been wasted for any other way, connect us with them, and then we form a relationship that way. And we make a list of what we want to try and sell week over week, and we try to match that up with what is available on a weekly basis. So some farmers will sell for every week for 6 months during the growing season and won't talk to them for the rest of the year. Some farmers will sell from every other week throughout the year. And then there's wholesalers. So wholesalers we sell from basically when they have produce that they need to move, that like avocados that are becoming ripe and wouldn't be good to sit on the grocery store shelf for a week or 2, but need to be eaten or consumed within like 5 days. Oftentimes they'll throw that produce away because it's taking up very valuable space in their warehouse. So we have relationships with a lot of wholesalers to buy their produce for less than for less than market rate, and pass those savings on to our consumers, and our consumers also get produce that's at the peak of ripeness, right? Because you can't often find a ripe avocado in a grocery store. So that's really how we choose our producers.
And an interesting question, just I think it's a good follow-up to because it's about supply. It was from Randall Wolf. I mean, what do you do about seasonal adjustments and forecasting, given that supply is a little bit different season to throughout the season?
Yeah, I mean, we shift basically where we buy from. In the summer, we're buying a lot from this area, so Virginia, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Delaware, New Jersey, New York. During the winter, we're sourcing from much farther down south, so Georgia, Carolina, Florida. And we try to buy as much locally as possible. So we consider local within 100 miles of our facility and regional within 300 miles. So our goal is to try and get the majority of our produce, more than 50% within regional, and then more than half of that, so above 25% within local. And we have goals to get that number up, increasing year over year. It's difficult though. It's challenging based on the environment and based on the seasonality and nature of produce. Right, it changes based on the seasons. And
there's quite a few questions also about the trajectory of the business. There's one straight question that, are you still growing, and do you see yourself on a continual growth path? And there's another question which is about just clarifying where you're operating outside of Maryland and what you see as your scale up trajectory so where is the business growing, and where's it growing, and where do you see it growing in the future?
Yeah, I mean, our main source of growth is increasing our average order of our customers. Customers are currently doing multiple grocery shops, one with Hungry Harvest, one with some other stores to supplement anything they can't get from Hungry Harvest. And we're trying to change that narrative. So what we're doing is offering more branded products, Hungry Harvest branded products like applesauce or Hungry Harvest soup or salads or bread, things like that have our brand on them that we just started last year.
Mm-hmm.
And we're trying to increase customers' basket size and how much of their grocery wallet is going towards Hungry Harvest versus other stores. Second is, we're of course always looking for more customers and more subscribers for our service. And the third is, in our existing areas. And then the third is expanding to new areas. So we choose cities based on demographic research. What cities do we think have big market potential for Hungry Harvest? So we've worked with consultants in the past to identify cities that we think are going to be very successful if we grow in, if we launch them. And that's we have a very like comprehensive way to choose the next city. We have a set of criteria that's like 20 bullet points long. And so basically those are the three areas of growth. So average order size, and then growing within our markets, and then expanding outside of our markets as well.
And there's a follow-up question that was embedded in one of the questions about scale up. I mean, what do you see as the largest problem you're facing as you scale up?
Yeah, the market's getting pretty competitive, to be honest. There are a number of players that are entering the space that have just competitive offerings. And so COVID was very interesting for Hungry Harvest. We had incredible demand in 2020. We were very lucky to have been one of the few companies that actually benefited from people staying home and ordering groceries online. So we doubled or tripled our sales from 2019 to 2020. 2021 was a totally different story. As people started getting vaccinated, the world started opening back up. People wanted to get out more, go to grocery stores, farmers markets, and so people are ordering less groceries online. And so that year was kind of plateauing for Hungry Harvest, and now the trend is increasing a little bit. So the industry is picking up the pace, and so that's being at the mercy of COVID and the industry has been very difficult, right? And especially with competitors that are offering very good products out there. So we're trying to make our offerings more competitive, hence why we're expanding into new areas, why we're offering more branded products and more grocery items to really make ourselves stand out even further.
Right. And I think I think I can combine a couple of questions here into one goal, but the question just came up there. I think combined with another question earlier on, elaborating what you're doing to directly meet the needs of underserved communities. And because you just started talking about it, but you also talked about how you had to move away from some of your strategies due to COVID into other strategies. And just to clarify, I think I heard you say that one of your strategies there was also going through hospitals and insurance companies. Just to clarify for another questioner there, that's the only part of your B2B strategy, isn't it? As them as distributors, or do you have another B2B strategy? But start also with maybe just clarifying how you're meeting the needs of the underserved community.
Absolutely. So we've done a lot of research onto. I'll try to share as many details without doing too much of a deep dive. We've done a ton of research on what are the sources of hunger, where the kinds of people that are demographically located, like where is hunger located and what can we do about it? And that's where by asking those questions, we came up with this program called Produce in a Snap, which was running for 5 years at 25 locations, where we basically set up a farmers market like stands at schools and community centers and hospitals that are in areas of high food insecurity. that don't have access to, these communities didn't have access to fresh produce. And we're not going to communities and saying, you're broken, we're trying to fix you. We're not going to communities and saying, you guys have to eat fresh produce. We're simply trying to provide an option, right, where there previously was none. And so that was our stab at trying to correct the issue of food deserts, right, which a food desert or area of high food insecurity, those exist because grocery stores, they're massive today, right? They need a certain amount of foot traffic in order to justify their capital expenditure of opening a new store. And so therefore, if they can't get that foot traffic, then they don't go into an area, and then the people that are left that are in that area are left with very few options. So our idea was, what if you can decrease the amount of capital you need to sell produce, which was exactly the point behind partnering with some institutions to set up little produce stands in areas of high food insecurity. So did that for about 5 years. We served tens of thousands of unique customers through that program. It was working really, really well until COVID hit. And since COVID, we've been very reliant on partners who are doing great work in different communities that are hit by food insecurity. And so we provide boxes for them to distribute, either for free or for a discounted price to their clientele. And so we work with corporations, hospitals, nonprofits, food banks to basically sell them a discounted box that they can, again, either sell to their clientele or pass on for free to their clientele. So that's the couple of things we've done in terms of food security that I think it's been a little bit deeper, or it's been attempted to be a little bit deeper in solving the issue than just donations.
And there's a couple of questions here around ugly versus pretty vegetables. Okay, and one basic question is, I'm just going to paraphrase this question. What is it about pretty vegetables that means a Walmart or Whole Foods or whatever won't have to go for pretty vegetables and not the ugly vegetables? And then maybe a connection to that, is there a pricing differential here, and how do you think about that? And
this is a uniquely American problem, right? In other countries around the world, and 100 years ago in this country, there was no such thing as pretty produce or ugly produce. There was just produce, right? You go to any market in Europe or in Asia, in South America, produce looks like it was harvested, right? Strawberries don't have to be perfect. Carrots don't have to be perfectly straight. People just, buy produce because that's the way it tastes. Actually, there was Driscoll's did a study in Portugal where their first launch to Portugal was a complete failure because their berries looked too perfect, and people thought there was something wrong with them, like they were chemically altered or something, that they didn't look natural, right? And so it failed with so they had to alter their product there. We've been brainwashed by advertising, by grocery stores, to think that produce grows in a grocery store, right? That's where it comes from. And it's sitting there perfect on the shelf. Everything looks the same. And because everything looks the same, the one thing that doesn't look the same, people are going to think there's something wrong with it, and they're not going to choose that one. So grocery stores don't even bother to put things that are crooked or scarred on the shelf. A really great example of this that I'm not sure how many people know about this, but my mind was blown first time I heard about this. Bell peppers, right? So bell peppers have to have 4 legs on them so they can stand up straight. If they don't have 4 legs on them, they only have 3 legs or 2 legs or 1 leg, or they just don't look, that they're not able to stand up straight, they'll get thrown away. They are not able to sit on a grocery store shelf. Nothing wrong with the pepper, it's just how it looks. And I just think that's ridiculous, right? So we've been kind of brainwashed to think that food comes from a grocery store. It doesn't. It comes from a farm. Grocery stores just sell produce. And again, this is a uniquely American, past 50 years problem where our food system has been largely centralized with the basically the mass adoption of refrigerated transportation that allows things to be grown in California and shipped over to the East Coast, which makes basically strawberries, people on the East Coast are willing to pay higher for strawberries that are out of season than people in California are willing to pay for strawberries. So that's why they wanted to initially, create that transportation route. Unfortunately, what that created was the need for a high price point in a grocery store, for grocery stores to charge a high price point, that is, created this expectation of perfection from consumers. And unfortunately, that leads to a lot of waste. So the centralized food system where you have, food going to these giant distribution centers and then going all across the country is very wasteful. Whereas, in the developing world, or basically all over the world besides the United States, you have very close quarters where produce is grown very close to where it's being sold, and therefore you don't have all these false or too high expectations, and food's not wasted nearly as much because of how it looks. So it's a very interesting conundrum of how do we solve this issue from the supply chain and the demand perspective. But it's a fun one. It's certainly one that we enjoy talking about.
That's great. Now, listen, we've got a lot of great questions, and we try and keep true to we could keep going for another hour, but we said this would be a 1 hour session, and there's some great questions both about social enterprises per se, and again some questions really going back to supply chain, investors. I know you got after the Shark Tank, you got some other angel investors. You made one round. You haven't made other rounds yet.
Yeah. We made a Series A rounds a couple of years ago of about 14 million or so.
Yeah, and so there's some great questions around that as well. I'm going to kind of privilege. I got two last questions, and this is the second last question, which I think is a good generic question about. It's from Elizabeth Sardelli. What new problems do you anticipate? Okay. And actually, there were a couple of other questions like this as well about how you see things changing and whether you be true to your mission as well. But what new problems do you anticipate?
Before I answer that, I do have a stop at 5. I have a meeting right after this. So unfortunately, I'll have to hop off. But problems I would anticipate. The price of fuel is crazy right now, and we don't anticipate that going anywhere. So when it just drives up our costs, you see anything in the grocery store. Everybody sees this if you drive a car and you have a gas car, right? But what you don't see is, or might not notice as much, is everything in the grocery store is going up. And that's because the cost to get it to that grocery store is incredibly high. Just give you a tangible example. We used to send a truck to Richmond, about 2 hours away from our facility. Pre-pandemic, that truck cost about $700 per week. Post-pandemic, or today, costs about $2,000 per week, right? So it's almost tripled in costs just for a 2-hour trip, and that's happening everywhere. So transportation, definitely an issue, and I think inflation is, we can talk about this for hours of why it's happening or what's causing it. One of the reasons is the price of raw materials, and fuel prices are causing your products that you love to buy, the price to get it from point A to point B is increasing. And so it's going to come straight out of companies' wallets and eventually consumers' wallets. And that is a problem that every business in America is facing. So the joys of being a CEO are that no matter what the economic climate is, you are still accountable for your business's success or failure. It's how you deal with those problems that makes the difference. So, unfortunately, that is the last question I can answer. I would love to talk to you guys more.
That's good. Listen, I
great questions.
I really appreciate you coming. We'll save the questions when we come back. We may come back to you. Let's have an electronic clap for Evan. Okay, and
thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks very much for coming. And and let me make a couple of announcements just for everybody else, and because I know Evan's got to go. Thank you very much, Evan. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, all.
Right, great. And I know we keep going, and we try and make these sessions an hour. So thanks very much for everybody for coming and